Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you, Susan, for that kind introduction. I appreciate it. I also want to thank my friend and colleague, Dan Cronin, for inviting me here today, long ago in the spring. Dan and I represent very different counties, each with its own challenges and priorities, but we work together on a number of important issues, including transportation and economic development. The fact that Democratic Cook County and Republican DuPage County can work together so closely should be a good indicator of how we both view government. We hold our offices at the pleasure of the voting public, and we owe our constituents thoughtful and sound policy, accountability, and a dedication to improving service. Today we're here to talk about how we can all do more to collaborate and cooperate. And yes, that can mean making difficult decisions and challenging the status quo, because at the end of each day we should be able to answer yes to the simple question: are we doing all that we can to serve our residents and make their tax dollars go further? Looking across the room, I see government leaders at all levels. And I know that the decisions that many of you confront today are not easy. But we're not elected to make easy decisions. There's a risk in challenging and confronting long-standing practices. But there's also reward. I'm going to share with you some of the reforms that I've implemented to make Cook County more efficient and talk about the challenges and rewards of these reforms. When I took office 5 years ago, not only was the government in fiscal trouble, county agencies lacked strategic direction. Few, if any, of our departments collected any meaningful data on their work. They lacked metrics on how they were performing or failing to perform. After solving for the budget crisis that we face coming in the door, we looked around the county to see how other high-performing county governments, such as Montgomery County in Maryland, King County in Washington, Kansas City in Missouri, were achieving success. Not surprisingly, we found that many were using performance management models. So we passed the performance management statute, and then our senior leadership took tough countywide goals which we hold ourselves accountable to. I want to thank Tasha Cruzat, who's my chief of staff, who's here today, and all of my staff for their hard work on this initiative. We call it STAR, Setting Targets, Achieving Results, and it's the core of how we manage our operations. We've pushed past the idea that fiscal responsibility must be confined to an annual budget document. Instead, it's a way to establish strategies for transforming the way that government works. Among many improvements, the internal performance management process has helped us achieve provisional accreditation of our medical examiner's office, reduce the size of our fleet of vehicles, reduce employee absenteeism, pay our bills more promptly, and collect delinquent taxes. Additionally, we post STAR reports publicly. By making this data transparent, we offer the public a tool for engaging in our efforts. Shifting gears, literally, we're entering the home stretch in the development of Cook County's first long-range transportation plan in more than 70 years. When I took office, I inherited a highway department that, for as long as anyone could remember, focused on annual repairs to a shrinking number of county-owned roads and bridges. So I asked our highway department what sort of long-range planning has been done about regional transportation. The answer was none. Let me just say, this question was prompted by the fact that we decided that we needed to take a broader view of transportation than just simply repairing and maintaining roads and bridges. So we created a Department of Transportation and Highways, because that's the way in which you are eligible for federal transportation planning dollars. You have to have a Department of Transportation. So we changed the name. We thought initially that was good enough. But the federal government said, by the way, you need a transportation plan, not just to change your name. And so I told my staff, okay, let's just find the last plan we did and update it. So we looked around, and behind a file cabinet, we found a dusty copy of a plan from the 1940s. Now think about that. The largest county in the state, with almost half the state's population, hadn't done any transportation planning for more than 70 years. But the interesting thing about that 70-year-old plan is it laid out all the corridors that eventually became our contemporary expressway system. every single one. So I determined it was high time for an update, and early last year I asked our Transportation and Highway Department to produce a new plan, one that's multimodal, that looks at the region as a whole, and that links residents into jobs and vice versa. The principles of the plan recognize that transportation is a regional asset and therefore needs planning and investment on a regional level. We're vetting the draft plan through an expert panel and expect to produce a public document early next year, and then vet that with a public process before finalizing what I expect to be a visionary plan. I also want to make mention of the work we're doing with colleagues like Dan Cronin, Aaron Lawler, Dan Cronin from DuPage, Aaron Lawler from Lake, and Joe Gottemoller. Help me out, Joe. There he is, right there. Okay, good. We've worked closely with Lake County on reconstruction of Lake Cook Road, a major east-west thoroughfare that provides an important link for residents of both counties to do business and to get to their jobs. We're working with DuPage County, the Tollway Authority, the state and other parties on the Elgin O'Hare Western Access Project. We convened our first Regional Economic Forum in December of 2013, and the group included government executives, economic development professionals, and business leaders from Cook County, the City of Chicago, and the counties of DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Lake, McHenry, and Will. We've met regularly ever since, twice a year, and we've seen significant success from this collaboration. Shortly after our initial meetings, Cook County led an effort to bring together more than 40 organizations and municipalities to form the Chicago Metro Metal Consortium. We're working on establishing sensible truck permitting to facilitate the movement of freight through our region and ending the practice of requiring truckers to navigate volumes of red tape in the form of obtaining numerous governmental permits. We believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, and because of that, we are strongly committed to working with our neighbors and building capacity in municipalities in need of assistance. We've got many of those in Cook County. Working together can improve conditions for all. I want to thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to take your questions.
The only other microphone's up here, so.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right.
You all have index cards on your table. I'm Josh Ellis from the Metropolitan Planning Council. You all have index cards on your table. If you have if you have questions, one of my colleagues will come around and pick them up. Colleagues all over.
Oh, thank you.
And that's not going on anyway, so I'll just continue to be loud. If you have questions, I do have a couple here just to get started. The first is, President Preckwinkle, to your knowledge, are there any other plans that haven't been updated in 70 years? Anything else?
Not to my knowledge, not to my knowledge.
Okay. You mentioned the STAR system. Could you share a couple lessons learned from that? And how would a community without the resources of Cook County get started with something comparable?
Well, let me begin with our first budget process. So we walked in the door. The fiscal year had already begun. Our fiscal year begins December 1st, and I was sworn in on December 6th. There was no budget, no plan for a budget, nothing. My predecessor left that to me as a little present. So we spent the next 2 months with the invaluable help of the Civic Consulting Alliance. Brian Fabes and the crew there, I'm deeply indebted to for that and many reasons. They helped us try to figure out what the heck was going on and to put together a budget plan. And then we took another month to get it passed in the Board of Commissioners. So it was the end of February, the end of the first quarter, and we finally had our budget in place. And I said to my staff, we're never going to do this again. First of all, we're going to get the budgets passed before the fiscal year begins. And secondly, we're going to try to figure out what the heck's going on here, because it was very much operating in the dark, because we didn't have any performance data from any of the departments. So trying to figure out where you should make cuts when you don't know how well a particular substantive area is doing is very difficult. So we brought everybody together in 5 substantive areas. Our 2 biggest, of course, are public health and public safety. That's where 2/3 of our money goes. But finance and administration, property and taxation, and then our Bureau of Economic Development. So we ended up with 5 substantive areas in county government. Everybody fit in one, including our separately elected officials. And we got the principals to sit down around a table and say, okay, what are you doing how can you do it better? How can we measure your progress? And in the public safety arena, what everybody agreed, and that's the sheriff, the chief judge, the public defender, the state's attorney, the clerk of the court, 5 separately elected officials, everybody agreed that we had too many people accused of nonviolent crimes, accused but not convicted in our jail. And everyone agreed that that was the case. The jail population was hovering around 10,000 where it had been for 2 decades. So we started working with the separately electeds around what things we could do collectively to reduce that population. You have to understand, and I say this wherever I go to the shock of many, that in most of our county jails, the people who are there are not serving a sentence. Actually, overwhelmingly, they're not serving a sentence. In Cook County Jail, it's 10% of the people in jail who are serving a sentence. That means 90% are awaiting trial. They're there because they can't pay their cash bonds. You know, our jails are now our poorhouses. And poorhouses, of course, with a disproportionate concentration of black and brown people. 86% of the people in my jail are black and brown, although the population of the county is only 50% African American and Latino. So we tried to work with our separately electeds around this issue of reducing the jail population. Everybody, again, had agreed we were going to do it, but we didn't see much progress. So we ended up going to the Supreme Court of Illinois, asking them for their intervention, and basically sharing with them over time the work that we'd done around performance management and what it showed us about where the roadblocks were and the obstacles were to making change, and asked them to help us make the change that was needed. So on one hand, performance management sort of highlighted what our issues were, but I had to seek external support to try to deal with the issues that were raised. So performance management kind of gave us the foundation to go to the Supreme Court and ask them to use their leverage to help us. So that's one sort of very macro example. The other is in the medical examiner's office, where we use performance metrics to try to figure out what the heck was happening. We discovered that we had issues by reading the Sun-Times one morning, which is always the worst way for you as an executive to find out that you got problems. And so we used our performance metrics there to try to figure out what the issues were, what were causing the problems, and to eventually seek and obtain the resignation of the medical examiner, bring in a very qualified person, Dr. Sina from Florida, and change staffing and procedures there in a way that resulted in now accreditation for the medical examiner's office, which it had not enjoyed before, by the National Association of Medical Examiners. So one sort of complicated, lots of moving parts example in criminal justice, and one more modest one in the medical examiner's office.
Thank you very much. So we have time for 2 questions, and just for time, I'm going to give you both of them at the same time, and you can answer one after the other. First one is, we've talked a lot about municipalities today, but there's another unit of government here in the Northeast and throughout the state that we don't talk about that as much, and that's townships. Do you have a vision or a thought about the optimal role of townships moving forward here in Northeastern Illinois, and is the county doing anything with them? And the second question is, what can you, within your powers, or what assistance do you need from Springfield in order to simplify the intergovernmental agreement process?
Okay.
2 questions.
So I was speaking one day, and I can't remember where it was, and somebody asked me about consolidation, and I said, if I was going to serve for 20 years, this is something I would get to on year 15. And it was a reflection of the magnitude of the internal problems that we had in Cook County that I felt I needed to address before I looked at the issue of consolidation. I've decided, frankly, that I'm going to invest my political capital in trying to get people to work on shared service, particularly, frankly, our struggling municipalities in Southern Cook, rather than trying to deal with the township issues or the larger issue of how many units of government we have in Illinois. Just because, as I said, that in my view, the political capital that I have to expend to try to do something about that is disproportionate to the end result, and I've got so many internal issues that I've got to address to make the county function more efficiently, that's where I ought to spend my time and energy. The intergovernmental agreements, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
The question was, what can the county do, or what assistance might be needed from Springfield to make intergovernmental agreements between counties or county municipalities or county and townships easier to accomplish?
Okay, so I don't think exactly it's the right time to ask Springfield to do very much, so. And if they ever get their budget passed, I got a pension bill I'd like them to address, so that's where I'd put my money, anyway.
Okay, well, thank you very much.